We're coming from all over the world. And I had a chance to sneak a peek at the guest list, and it is really true. We're coming from multiple continents, from multiple time zones. So I want to invite everyone to take a look around the Zoom. One of the beautiful things about Zoom is no one knows if you're looking at them or reading their names, and just offer a little gratitude in whatever way makes sense to you, that we have this opportunity to gather together, to be in this community and to be with others who are interested in similar things. I know as pee and poo people, sometimes those rooms are hard to find. So I think it really is an honor and a wonderful thing to be here. So hello, all of you who I'm looking at. It's so good to see you. And I'm glad we're together. I also want to, as a way of invocation, offer a moment of gratitude to all that came before us to bring us to this moment, specifically to honor for those of us in colonized lands, the indigenous peoples who stewarded these lands. I'm coming to us from Washington, D.C., the lands of the Piscataway and the Tenochtitlan. I know the Rich Earth Institute is located on Abenaki lands. So just that encouragement to be mindful of where we are in space and time. If you're in the US or elsewhere and you have never known which native populations were and often are still in your land, you can find out here at native-land, native-land.ca. And to also honor that, gathering here for urine diversion, we're sort of future ancestors reclaiming ancient technologies of soil revitalization, right? Something that helped communities thrive on the lands that they held. And we hope that future communities will also be able to utilize these technologies to survive in our rapidly changing global landscape. So let's just take a breath together to honor all that's come before us and the fact that we've arrived at this moment. Okay, so good. Well, here we are. In just a moment, we're going to hear from Chelsea Wald, of whom, if you are not already a super fan, you are about to be a super fan. So she's going to be speaking for about 45 minutes, and then we'll also have a little time for questions until about 1:15 Eastern time, which for Chelsea, coming from The Hague, is much later. So we're going to let her out to go to dinner. So if you do have questions that are coming up while the presentation is happening, please put those questions or those comments in the chat. Chelsea will not be looking at the chat, but I will be, and I'll be moderating those questions to ask once the time comes. And if you're in person, if you're one of those lucky people at the P Palace itself, the Rich Earth Depot right now, then after the presentation, the time will come where you can head up to the screen, to the microphone where Julia is now, and offer your questions as well. All right, so without further ado, Chelsea is a science and environmental reporter who started writing about toilets more than a decade ago. A recent story in the journal Nature focused entirely on urine diversion and reuse. I highly recommend it if you have not already read it. And her 2021 book, Pipe Dreams, about the future of the toilet, was recently named a finalist for the National Association of Science Writers Science in Society Awards. Congratulations, Chelsea. I hope it wins that award. I hope you make billions of dollars.
I didn't win, but it is.
Oh, okay. Well,
finalist, I'll take it. I'm very pleased. It's quite honored.
The sequel is going to win for sure. And
yes.
Thank you for emerging briefly from your parental leave to give this talk. I hand you the floor. Thank you.
Thank you so much for the kind introduction. I'm so happy to be presenting today. It's great to be among people who think about toilets, at least as much as I do. Oh, you don't want to see that, do you? If not more. Are we good, Sean? Okay. And close to World Toilet Day, which, if you don't know, is November 19. I'm really a fan of this summit. I've attended virtually several years, and really have learned a lot from the different talks, and have a lot of appreciation and respect for the other keynote speakers who've been here in past years. So it's really an honor and a delight to be among their number. So who am I? As Sean mentioned, I'm a science and environmental reporter who's been working in that field for almost 2 decades, about half of that time focused on toilets. Last year, I published this book on the future of the toilet, which has a whole chapter on urine. And then feeling like I still wanted to understand, something was left on the table for me. I still wanted to know more about it, write more about it in more depth, in a sort of more technical way than I do in my book. I was able to follow that up with a pretty deeply researched news feature in the journal Nature exclusively on urine. And I think that's one of the main reasons that I'm here today. My goal for this talk is to share this story of mine, my personal story of my decade-long journey from my first exposure to urine diversion, which at the time seemed a bit like a fringe idea that I, to be honest, didn't take terribly seriously as a large-scale solution, to being convinced enough of its importance and viability that I did pitch and write this very serious story about it in a major scientific journal. And the reason I want to tell you my story is that in some ways it parallels the history of the field, at least the more recent history of the field. And I think by telling my story and sort of tying it to what was going on in the field as I learned about it, it might help you folks get on the same page for the rest of the summit and come to sort of share vision of where you come from and where this is all going, and bridge some of the gaps between your fields and approaches. I know people who come to the summit come from all different backgrounds. Some of you are scientists, some of you are advocates, some of you are practitioners, and maybe this will help sort of create a common language for you about urine diversion and reuse, and it might shed some light on some of the main themes of urine diversion as well, of the conference. And I think by showing what it took to convince me of the importance of this, that it might also help you understand what it could take to convince others, because I did go on a sort of journey, and I think, you know, you'd have, if you want more people to do this, you're going to have to take other people along on a very similar journey. So for me, this journey started by knocking the conventional toilet off its pedestal, so to speak. I'm going to tell you how that happened for me. Then I'm going to look at a few case studies, a few projects that I've seen in the past 10 years. Then I'm going to move on to why the past few years may represent a turning point for urine diversion for the practice. And then I'm going to give a little cautionary note, cautionary tale, before I conclude with what I hope is a rousing message of hope for the future. So how did this happen to me? So in 2013, I got 2 assignments. This is how I work as a freelancer. Either I pitch an editor, or an editor comes to me with an idea. But in fact, this happened by coincidence. Both of these stories came my way. They were not my idea. The first was a story about new toilet technologies for very low resource contexts, where people might have very poor toilets or no toilets at all. And for that, many of us think of, and certainly at that time, what was really in the news was the Gates Foundation's Reinvent the Toilet Challenge, and I ended up writing about that a good deal for this article. And the Reinvent the Toilet Challenge, for those of you who don't know, it's kind of a moonshot to develop a very low cost, a reliable, high-tech, single-family toilet that can process waste on site, so that you could kind of plop it down anywhere in the world without the whole infrastructure of sewers, and that it would work and keep people safe. The second story was totally different, not that related to urine, but related to toilets, as it turned out. I was assigned a story about heat in cities and where we can find heat and reclaim it to create a new source of heat and energy for our cities. And it turns out that one of those places is sewers, which is something I had never thought about before. And what this combination of stories in a very short period of time did was that it opened the lid of my mind, as I like to say, to toilets. So it just got me thinking about toilets and allowed me to start seeing a flurry of innovation in toilets and the infrastructure that connects to them. And what I found was a lot of innovators in different fields, from engineering to design to sociology, all thinking in new ways about this object, the toilet. And I wanted to know what was going on. I mean, I was still confused. One of the reason I was confused was, like many people before I began this journey, what I had absorbed about the toilet is that it's pretty miraculous. I mean, when people talk about the history of the civilization, the toilet kind of stands out as a key moment. It is one of the great inventions of humankind. And this is the short history. So a man named Sir John Harrington ushered in the modern era of the flush toilet in the late 16th century, when he invented a very early version. But it did not catch on until the 19th century, when a version of these did gain popularity and the toilet became very widespread. This is an image of a miniature salesman's sample of a Jennings toilet, a particular brand of toilet from the early 1900s. And you can see it's very recognizable, both in the appearance and the functioning. The toilet didn't kind of work great at first. All the sewage from the toilets just ended up sort of flooding cities. It was really in the late 19th century when they started getting connected to big sewer networks that it started really cleaning cities. Those at first discharged into waterways, so they cleaned the cities but made rivers dirtier. But then in the early 20th century, scientists developed wastewater treatment that cleaned the sewage with microbes, and that's more or less what we have today. Just checking to make sure that nobody is. Okay. Everything's good, right? Yeah. Okay, good. This, along with related advancements like water treatment, led to huge benefits for public health, including the doubling of the human lifespan. And so that's great. It's a miraculous technology. But then again, that picture isn't really complete. That's me. And I'm standing in front of somebody's toilet. This is in Haiti, in Cap-Haïtien. This is someone's main toilet and their only toilet. It is in Haiti, but it's not that unusual. Billions of people use inadequate and unsafe toilets, and lots of poop around the world goes untreated. Good toilets reach relatively few people. And as I continued to pay attention to toilets over the years, I saw many ways in which toilet infrastructure is failing. And here are just a couple of headlines from recent years. We have a problem with public toilets. There aren't enough of them, and they're expensive to run. I mean, that's one of the reasons that politicians don't want to fund them, and they've been allowed to disappear from our cities. Toilet infrastructure, including sewers and wastewater treatment plants, is aging and chronically underfunded. The American Society of Civil Engineers gives it a D+ on its annual infrastructure report card. And it's not designed for climate change and extreme weather events. So when hurricanes hit, sewage often just coats the region. And finally, many rural people can't afford expensive septic systems or their maintenance, and that leads to sewage overflowing in yards and the diseases associated with that. This is a problem that's gotten increasing attention in the US in recent years, and there's really no reason, in my estimation, that people in a wealthy country or really anywhere should have to live like that. And I would ask, what's the point of a toilet if it just discharges to your backyard? That's to me, a real indictment of this technology and how we think of it and how we use it. In fact, you could say that the toilet plays a role in nearly every societal environmental ill because the toilet is so embedded into our lives. It's not the cause of these ills, but it can exacerbate them. The flip side of that, however, is that the toilet holds the potential to help solve many of these societal environmental ills. And that's why so many innovators are thinking about how we can ask more of our toilets in terms of health, sustainability, and equity. So, having knocked the toilet off its pedestal, I decided to go look into these innovations that I was seeing pop up all over. And so you know a little bit how I work. I tend to rely on a strategy called solutions journalism, which I want to tell you just a little bit about. Solutions journalism is not about investigating problems like you often see in major news exposés, but in fact, investigating the responses to the problem. It has 4 pillars. Focuses on a response. It distills lessons to offer insights. It looks for evidence of some kind for the claims that are made about the response. And it is honest about shortcomings and limitations of the response. To do this, I use the tools of journalism, and those include personal observation, reading very widely, and talking to as many people who will talk to me. So that allowed me to look into these innovations, give them a good hard look, and in doing so also shed light on the underlying problems. And among the many solutions I found in the toilet world was urine diversion, what brings us here today. So a little bit of history, a little bit more history, the history of urine diversion. Urine used to be a valuable commodity, at least in some places. The practice of urine diversion probably is as old as urinals themselves. This is a Chinese urine pot that I found on Wikimedia Commons, but these sorts of practices have been found around the world. Urine contains most of the nutrients in our excreta, so more than poop, and very few of the pathogens, much less than poop. So in the past, some societies used urine, separately from poop for fertilizing crops, tanning leather, washing clothes, and even producing gunpowder. It was also used medicinally, like as a mouthwash and a disinfectant. And some people today still swear by it for some purposes. Then in the late 19th and early 20th century, when I was telling you the modern model of centralized sewage management arose, that led to what some scholars have called urine blindness. So you can imagine not thinking about, not seeing urine anymore as a valuable resource. And that started to change again a little bit beginning in Sweden in the 1990s, when some researchers began pushing for people to see the value of urine again. And as you know, by keeping urine out of sewage, you can transform it from pollution to resource really in an instant. And that concept was definitely solid, but there was a problem, and that was with the toilets themselves. To bring this idea to every home, it would be important to design a urine diverting toilet that everyone could use and would use. And this is a urine diverting toilet that I took a picture of at Wageningen University. And I'm not singling out this particular one, just showing you how urine diverting toilets have been made or were made in that time period. You can see here in the front, you've probably seen this, a little basin in the front to collect the urine, and then the normal sort of water in the back to collect poop. They go down separately. But what happened was that several pilot studies of urine diversion toilets in Europe during the early 2000s, during that period where people were exploring this idea, revealed that although people were interested in the concept of urine diversion, they just didn't like toilets that worked like this. And in fact, it was such a strong response. I spoke recently to Toffa Larsen at EAVAG in Switzerland. She was involved with a lot of this early research. And she told me that she and her colleagues were, in fact, actively discouraging pilot projects because they knew that those projects would fail because people just didn't really like the toilets. And they were afraid of giving urine diversion as a concept a bad name, because it would become too associated with this experience of a toilet that people didn't enjoy using. And in fact, to a certain extent, it did get a bad name, because when I started looking into toilets, many of the experts that I spoke to were not very enthusiastic about urine diversion. But still, urine diversion did have some potential use cases, and I did look at some of these over the years. One was low resource context, like the kind that I mentioned before, a place where there is no infrastructure, there's no running water for flushing. Even in those cases, even if you don't recover the urine, diverting it will help improve dry toilets because it decreases odors. But those projects like that, there was one very famous one in South Africa, which is ongoing. They also had mixed results because people also didn't have good experience with the toilets themselves. Very often they felt that the toilets were toilets for the poor. They didn't feel, and they felt that they had the right to the same toilets that wealthy people had. They didn't want to be given second-class toilets. This is sort of where I arrive on the scene. At the time, I lived in Austria. Right now, I live in the Netherlands. And I was lucky that I lived in Austria because there I could meet a designer named Harold Grundl of EOS. I know that the design firm is sending some people to present here. He had been, as he described it to me, a bit disillusioned with designing things for the wealthy, and he wanted to do something that for him had a bit more meaning, or yeah, that did some good in the world. And he approached the folks at EAVAG, and they teamed up to work on a new kind of toilet for the Reinvent the Toilet Challenge. And it was for this story that he described for me what they did in Nautilus. His goal was to, in fact, design a toilet that would overcome this toilets for the poor stigma, but instead be desirable, a kind of status object, just like the flush toilet that could also serve the purpose of, in fact, providing safe sanitation almost anywhere that had enough space for it. And this was a very promising idea, but the technicalities of separating urine from feces were still quite challenging. And at the time, they were working on a squat toilet in their studio in Austria, and this is what I saw here. You can't see too much detail, but I found this old picture, and I really was fascinated by it, but it never occurred to me when I was looking at it that it was anything that I would ever want in my home, or that anything that would work in a place like Vienna. Then later, well, then there's the question of what to do with the urine. I had the opportunity to visit a container-based sanitation project in late 2018, and this was in Cap-Haitien in Haiti. And I showed you one of the pit latrines that I saw there. There's no sewers in Cap-Haitien, but there is an alternative provided by the organization Soil. And Sasha Kramer from Soil was a keynote speaker here a few years ago. I think you can still watch her presentation online. And they provide dry toilets like this. On the outside is an artisan-made shell, and inside there's a pail that catches poop, and then the pee gets funneled to the front. So they are practicing urine diversion there in Haiti already. This is photos from inside Soil's headquarters. But there's toilets like this around Cap Haitian. What happens is that people take the pails, they put them outside their homes. Workers come to pick them up. You can see what I was there. There was flooding in the streets, so the workers had to actually wade through the flood waters in order to get the pail and load it onto a vehicle like this, a three-wheeler, and then take it to a composting center. The problem is that there is no urine in the pail, and they in fact don't collect the urine. The urine gets funneled away from the pail because they're trying to prevent odors in the poop, and then also because it would just be very heavy to have all of that urine in the pail, and they are, their biggest cost is the fuel for these vehicles. And so if they could find a way to use that urine and perhaps make a product out of it, it could help them pay for the service and make their whole operation more cost effective, which would be absolutely great for them. But at the moment, they, along with many of the container-based sanitation projects around the world, are not yet making use of their urine because they don't have a technology for doing it. I'm going to move on to another project, which is in a higher resource context, and where there seemed to be at the time to me limited room for urine diversion. I had a very personal opportunity to divert my own urine, to donate it. After I moved to the Netherlands, I was talking one day to my friend Claire Furlong, who's a professor of non-sewered sanitation at IHE Delft here. And she totally offhandedly mentioned over coffee that there's a nonprofit in the Netherlands that collects urine from pregnant people to recover a hormone that can be made into a fertility drug. What she didn't know at the time was that I was actually 8 weeks pregnant. And so I went and I signed up for this immediately. They came to my house, and this is the organization. It's called Moeders voor Moeders, Mothers for Mothers. This is how they advertise they sort of advertise to all of these pregnant women in the Netherlands, telling them, please collect your urine. You pee into this pitcher, you pour it into the jug, and then you leave it outside your home next to your bicycle. And someone comes and picks it up in a truck and takes it away. And you do this for just a few weeks at the beginning of the pregnancy, when this hormone is peaking in your body, and then it gets turned into a drug. And this was happening. This has been going on for 90 plus years in the Netherlands, unbelievably. And it is happening at a kind of scale here. Some 35,000 people donate each year for this. But it also, in a way, is very limited. It's only pregnant people. It's only happening in the Netherlands. So it's sort of not a very, in some ways, it is quite large scale. 35,000 people seems amazing, but on the other hand, it's fairly limited. And also in the Netherlands, I came to know a company known as DESA, which does decentralized source separated sanitation. They presented at last year's summit. In a government building in The Hague, they have a demonstration project with waterless urinals. They collect the urine from those waterless urinals in the basement and transform it on the spot into these small phosphorus fertilizer balls called struvite. Many of you probably will have come across this. And this is where I want to say that sort of at this point in my journey, I had mostly come across phosphorus as one of the main sort of product, or the main thing that you could recover from urine, or the most important perhaps, because well, for one thing, phosphorus is a limited resource. It's mined, and there's not an infinite amount of it. And there was some discussion about peak P. When will we come to reach the end of phosphorus supplies in the world? That phosphorus does tend to be in some geopolitically unstable areas. So even if you don't mine it all, you might lose access to it for other reasons. And it is this technology to create struvite is fairly well established. So it's relatively cheap and easy to recover compared to the technologies for recovering other resources from urine. So at this point, I thought that phosphorus was the main topic of discussion that I had come across. Still, something like this works best in places where you can collect large quantities of urine in one place, not in homes, but in I'll say an office building with waterless urinals. And of course, urinals only serve, I mean, depending on what what the office building is for, but half the population of the office building was so leaving women out of the opportunity to donate. So that's another consideration, and keeps it as a fairly limited use case. So that brings us to about 2021, when Pipe Dreams came out, my book. Urine diversion just occupied one chapter. Excuse me, I'm going to close the door. I can hear my kid. The one who that I was pregnant with in that picture is now 4, and he's having a wild game downstairs. So it felt to me at that time like a fringe solution, one worth including for sure, but I didn't see it as a key technology in toilet transformation, just one out of many. And I suspected, based on my conversations with many people, that the paradigm shift to urine diversion to source separation was possibly too big for people to swallow, that it was a good idea but whose time was never really going to come, at least on a large scale. And for me, a few things have changed in the past couple of years, or what I've observed is that possibly a few things have changed in the past couple of years. The need is greater and more urgent, and importantly, more visible than ever. The appetite for radical transformative change is greater than ever, and certainly greater than I think it was before. And the technology for how to do this is coming a bit more into focus. And more scientists are coming on board as well, to help, and engineers to help develop this technology. One aspect of this is the size and urgency of the nitrogen crisis. So in the wrong places, nitrogen is massively harming ecosystems, especially coastal ecosystems, through harmful algal blooms and other mechanisms. And just in the past couple of years, new research has shed some harsher light on how much sewage is contributing to this crisis. And the Ocean Sewage Alliance, which is new in the past couple of years, will be presenting later. And I think they've done a lot of work to shed light on what in fact is going on. I'm going to show a few graphs coming up for those of you who are more technical. You can go, these are from the Nature Story. You can go look at them in more depth later if you want. And don't worry too much if this isn't your thing. You don't have to understand these graphs in order to follow this talk. This one shows how much each country's sewage and each type of of sewage management contributes to nitrogen in coastal waters. So what I want you to note is that sewers connected to treatment plants, so that's the blue, still spew an outrageous amount of nitrogen into the environment. It's really difficult and expensive for treatment plants to remove this nitrogen. And in many places, it's not required. Policy is that they can do it. So sewage treatment in and of itself doesn't solve this pollution problem. You can also see that the United States is number 3 on this list, and it's really sewage systems in the United States that are making the contributions. Other studies show that this amount is set to go up and up and up. So that's what I want you to see here, up and up and up. This is a projection to 2050. And that has terrible implications for both human and ecological health and the nexus between them. This is a problem that is indeed very difficult to solve. It's very difficult to solve without urine diversion. You could put it another way. Urine diversion is one of the simpler, less expensive ways to solve this very thorny problem. At the same time, the demand for nitrogen in fertilizer is also going up and up and up. This isn't a projection into the future, but you can project with your own mind. Almost none of this currently comes from a urine source. It comes from factories that use methane gas as one of the components, as well as a whole lot of energy to make nitrogen fertilizers. Methane gas is, of course, a limited resource, fossil fuel. And so this whole operation is the source of carbon emissions as well. Several researchers told me that they've estimated that urine could replace about 1/4 of nitrogen fertilizers worldwide. That's, of course, harvesting everybody's urine, which is maybe never going to happen, but nonetheless, you can see sort of the scales, the relevant scales. So 1/4 of nitrogen fertilizers could be replaced by collecting people's urine. So my story, Nature, came out in February 2022. By the end of that month, I think, if I have it right, Russia had invaded Ukraine. Much of the world's fertilizer is made in Russia from their natural gas their methane gas. So a shortage of nitrogen fertilizer started to look like a much bigger problem than it had even a month before, and as big of a problem potentially as phosphorus shortages. So that made this problem and the potential solutions seem all the more urgent. And I know that other journalists have since then written stories with that very angle. I also became convinced that urine diversion, urine reclamation could be done on a large scale in many different contexts, not just in those limited use cases that I had seen before. And I think that this might be one of the hardest things for sort of average people to get their heads around. Sewage is a single pipe. That's how we know it. And how are you going to manage 2 different streams? What are you going to do? You're going to dig up the streets to lay down a urine pipe? What are you going to do? You know, that's the big thing people have to get their heads around. So for the Nature story, we came up with a graphic that I think shows this. Again, there's a lot of words here. You don't have to look at this. There's 2 parts to this. This is the first part. So what you're looking at here is how can you get urine to where it's needed. That's the problem from Haiti. Like, it's heavy, it's liquid, it's mostly water. How do you get it from where it's being produced, like in everybody's homes, to where it's needed? So this first use case is just what's happening in some places where people just store the urine on site and you use it directly in agriculture. on site. So this could happen at like a farm, and also in a way that, you know, sort of somewhere between 1 and 2 what the Rich Earth Institute is doing, and I'll let them speak for themselves. And they're working on a lot of stuff, so I won't speak for them. But number 2 is that people in their homes could have could collect urine, and they could process it on site and store it on site, and then a collection vehicle could come and take it away to farms or factories or wherever it would be needed. On site, if you can extract what you want, what you need from the urine, and you can leave the water behind, it suddenly becomes much more viable, because moving all that water around, as I said, is very expensive and cumbersome. And so what you would love to do would be able to somehow extract the components. Here we go. Here's the other part. So now we're in a city, and then you start really getting scale, which is very exciting. But you still have this problem of urine being very bulky, very heavy. So you could have an old building. You have a city like New York City. You have a building. You're obviously not going to add an extra pipe in. This is number 3. What if you had a toilet that actually had a kind of collection and processing unit on the toilet that you could then collect from each toilet the component that you're trying to get out of the urine, the nitrogen or the phosphorus or both, and then you could take that away. Then you start getting to scale. Or think about number 4, cities around the world that are growing at really an incredible pace, building thousands upon thousands of units all at once, new buildings. What if you could build those buildings or retrofit buildings with urine diversion in mind? Then you can put in the extra pipes, send the urine, not in a separate sewer system to the wastewater treatment plant, but just to the basement, where you can treat the urine, extract the components you want, remove a lot of the liquid, and then again, pick it up and take it away. Then you start really seeing a scale emerge that is that's very interesting. I'm hearing some sounds, but I'm just going to keep going. Let's see. So there's 2 key technologies basically here. There's the processing technology, and then there's the toilet. So ideally, what you would do in order to extract the components you want is to either dry or concentrate the urine while retaining the nitrogen, which likes to sort of escape from urine as stinky ammonia gas and slip away. This is a callback to Sweden, where this concept sort of started picking up in the 1990s. This is Jenna Senecal from Sanitation 360. Bjorn Feneras, who was with this concept from the beginning, is also part of that team. And she's sitting on one of the EOS toilets, and this unit behind it can dry urine on the spot. So they're testing this out there. And then you need the toilet itself, the front end, the user interface, so to speak. This is also nearly in place. And this is another callback to earlier in the presentation. Harold Grundl, who I got to interview in Vienna so long ago, he kept at it and developed a very interesting technology. They're going to be speaking later, so I'll let them speak about their technology. But this is a design that diverts urine without requiring the user to sort of aim into that basin in the front. It it basically makes a urine diversion toilet look like any other toilet. So it's not a toilet for the poor. It's not a toilet that's weird or embarrassing. It's just a toilet that that works and that collects urine separately through this teapot effect that pulls the urine into a separate compartment, just basically using physics. And this toilet is enabling a lot of new demonstration projects, like the Sanitation 360 one to the left. And in fact, now I'm seeing lots and lots of new people involved in this concept all over the world. So it went from discouraging pilot projects to having, to enabling pilot projects. So do people want to do this? There's a lot of worries about disgust. This is a trial of barley that's made into a beer in Sweden with the Sanitation 360 project. It makes a nice little loop. People are willing to consume urine fertilized food to different degrees, but overall there is a big willingness. It's probably not surprising. You see France at the top, that France has some of the largest demonstration projects, including 1,000 resident eco quarter being built in the 14th arrondissement. And the European Space Agency in Paris is planning to put urine diverting toilets into their headquarters there. But even if people don't want to eat it, there are other products that can come from urine, raw chemicals, maybe even medicines and pharmaceuticals, like in the case that I donated urine, and maybe some electricity can be made, or building materials. So people are working on different things. I hope you'll be able to hear about some of those this year. But I still want to provide some food for thought in this regard, and perhaps a little pump to the brakes. So I want you to recall Moeders for Moeders, my donation. This is how they advertise themselves. It's a really nice project, it would seem, but it has been over the years subject to repeated scandals. A past one was when it was discovered that some of the hormone was being sold not to help women with fertility, but in fact for pig fertility, so in agriculture. And in a newspaper expose, it became known as Pigs or Mothers for Pigs or something like that, which turned people off to donating. This drug can be used not only for fertility, but for weight loss and bodybuilding. People aren't very fond of that. In the past, projects were set up in India and Brazil, and where urine was taken from poor people there and presumably used for wealthier people in the Netherlands and other countries. So there's issues of inequity. And ultimately, the donation, it's sold as a donation, but the urine does go to a pharmaceutical company that makes money off of it. And that isn't always very clear from the advertising. Just earlier this year, a reporter in the Netherlands found that the drug itself is no longer used in the Netherlands. And the quote here is, "I have no idea where my pee is used." So while right now we think of the toilet kind of as a trash can and urine diversion as a kind of recycling, you could imagine that people could start thinking of their urine as they do their blood or organs, and a different kind of communication might be necessary to convince them to donate those very personal materials. So I think it's important to keep at the front of mind the values of transparency and honesty, respect, privacy, and equity. And it's my hope that urine would be used for the common good and not for private gain. So I'm short on time. I've told you how I came to knock the toilet off its pedestal, to see the flaws in the system. I told you how I work as a journalist. I showed you some of the cases that I've come across of urine diversion being used in real life. The argument for why Urine Diversions Day may be here, may have come, and a bit of a cautionary tale. And I just want to end with the concepts with which I start my book, and that is Lutopia. Lutopia is a place where toilets are healthier, more sustainable, and accessible to all. Lutopia is a place where people are asking more of their toilets, seeing the potential in them for living in more harmony with each other and with the planet. And my conclusion is that to get there, we will need a diverse array of solutions, a kaleidoscope of toilets, including those that divert urine, as well as people, ambassadors who can reach people where they are and speak to the issues that matter most to them. Toilets are connected to so many of the issues we care about. By addressing toilets, we can address so much else: health, climate, environment, equity. So Lutopia is not just a world with better toilets, but it's a better world altogether. Still, you might say all of this sounds extremely difficult. There are a lot of problems, and where should the toilet really belong on our list of priorities? And to that I say something kind of radical. Everybody poops and pees, so why shouldn't we put the toilet first? And now I don't know what to do. That's it.
Thank you so much, Chelsea. That's the end, yeah?
That's the end, and this is me. Let's talk toilets.
Beautiful. Thank you so much.
Now I'm having technical problems. Should I stop sharing?
Yeah, stop that share. And then I just want to invite everyone, if you're in person, if you're off, let's take a brief moment. We can unmute ourselves, or you can use your little fake Zoom hand. Let's just give Chelsea a round of applause.
Thanks.
Thank you so much. And then the danger of that is now some of you have your mute off, so please put them back on, just so things aren't too disturbed. And I want to give Chelsea a moment to breathe, and I want to give everyone else a moment to breathe and just sort of take this in. So just 15, 20 seconds of a little pause and sort of think about what we heard. Let it settle. And as well, any images, any ideas, any words that are just rising to the top as you sit and you sort of take in all that we got. Please, any words that are coming up, put them in the chat. Any images, facts that fascinated you. This is also a great time to start putting in some questions. And we'll just gather a little kind of word cloud of response to start. I'll read that word cloud in just a moment, where we're waiting for things to come in. But Chelsea, we've got you till 1:15. Is that right? Or for another 15 minutes? Yeah, and your mute is still. You could yes. Turn your mic on.
Okay. I just need a little break. You can't see my screen anymore. It's all good. It got dark here in the Netherlands over the course of my presentation. That must have been
it's very dramatic.
Dramatic.
Yeah. And it's great. And we are seeing some of these words come into the chat, and I think it really gives us a good sense of where we're thinking, right? I see think big, revolution, necessity, powerful, circularity, give P a chance, life cycle thinking, we can, connection, health, equity, and kaleidoscope. This is great. Keep putting your questions in and other thoughts in the chat. And just to kick us off, and is that correct, Chelsea? We have about 15 minutes?
Yeah, sure, for sure.
Okay, great. So just also a little bit of context, Chelsea is a journalist, and as such, she can speak a lot about what she's seen, the history of the practice, as you heard, what's happening in the field, her process, etc. These are great questions for the next 15 minutes. Any questions that are about science, or sort of asking her to take a more editorial standpoint, might be better served for others who are gathering in the community. And of course, Chelsea, if I lob a question at you that you're like, I can't answer that, then you just let us know.
I'll just say it, yeah.
Exactly. But maybe to get us started, and this is a bias from my own particular interest in this. We all know that the taboos surrounding sanitation can help us get attention, but they also often lead to us being censored. Or even, I feel like this isn't exactly what you were referencing with the pharmaceutical issue, but the press can sometimes take these issues and run with it in ways that are derogatory, like calling wastewater processing back into drinking water toilet to tap technologies, things like that, right? So I think we always are in a little bit of a precarious place as we go out seeking attention for these things. So how have you found to work best getting this out there? How have you managed to pitch articles to outlets like Nature or the book? What was there any stigma that you faced, and how did you move through that?
Well, I think there's a certain appetite for toilet stories. I think that what I often see, what I had been seeing in the news was often these kind of gee whiz stories about toilets and new technologies that sort of make people pause for a second, and then they sort of go about their lives and they're like, oh, haha, poop, but it's harder to convince an editor to give a lot of space and serious space to this topic. I think in part because it's very it's relatively unknown, so it's just the editor might not have the sort of background needed to know. They may have this idea, oh, the toilet's fantastic, what's wrong with the toilet? Like, yes, of course, there's lots of people in the world who need toilets who don't have this technology yet, but it's just, it's just like, isn't this just a question of funding or something? Not realizing sort of the complexity of the problem, not having the toilet knocked off the pedestal in their own mind. So there's a whole lot of sort of backstory that I have to share in a very short period of time. And so what I've tried to do is, in my work, get these stories treated in a very serious way, in a more long form way. And yeah, I mean, it actually, the book was one of the easiest things in a way, not to write. It was incredibly difficult thing to do. It was probably one of the hardest things I ever did in my life, was to write a book. But actually selling the book, once I had sort of gathered all of these projects together and came up with the idea for the book, that was actually one of the easiest things that I ever got an editor to bite on. And I think it's because that very few people had ever done anything like it, So I think it's sort of a balance between capturing this, kind of riding on this sort of gee whiz thing that people always have when it comes to poop and toilets, and then convincing them to stick around for a bit of a longer, more serious ride than maybe they signed up for. I'm wondering, Sean, if you want to talk a little bit about how your book came to be as well, because you must have an answer to this question too.
I'd be happy to, but I also feel like our time is so short that I want to keep it focused on you. And then I can chat more about my book at a later time. But I do think, to your point, certainly in the 12 years that I've been in this space, the changes have been immense in terms of the destigmatization, the popularity of the poo emoji, even things like that, I think have really made a big difference. And, your book came out, then Lena Zeldovich's The Other Dark Matter, Brian Nelson's Flush just came out. So I think we are really seeing a shift of acceptability and of interest. But I echo what you're saying of like, you have to sort of justify it at the beginning to get people not just to go like, wow, no.
And I know Lena and Bryn, and they have great books too. And I think that one of the reasons that these books are coming out is not just the reduction of stigma, but because of this explosion of research, there's something to cover. for us journalists. There has to be something there. And like for the story in Nature, which does not commission a lot of feature stories. There's a very limited window for features. So how do you get a feature story in Nature? Well, you have to really show them that there's something there, that there's a there, there's people working on it, that there is a trend, that it is really important. It's a big job, actually. I don't get paid as a freelancer. I don't get paid until the story gets written, but so much of the work just goes into the pitch. So if they say no, I've done all of this work and, I don't get paid. So it is a bit of there's a bit of a leap of faith about it. Yeah.
You could put out your tip jar here, but also a good reminder to those of you who are doing all of that good research, which is a lot of people at this summit, to cultivate those relationships with journalists and to not keep it to yourself, right? To look for those avenues to broadcast what you're doing so that it can be covered and featured. So I'm seeing some more words that have come into the chat: reciprocity, P is for plants, potential, nutrient rich, it's time, resourcefulness, number one cause. I love that. Clever, and a few more. So I'm just going to take our questions mostly in the order of which they came for our few minutes left. Sarah Nahar was asking, you talked about urine blindness. What caused that? And also, what in some ways helped the blind to see again, if you will? What reawoke that interest, would you say?
Yeah, well, I mean, I think it's this flush and forget idea that we talk about with regard to toilets. We say it's a flush and forget technology. It's designed to hide your pee and poo. And in fact, if you think about it, I mean, this is something I thought, how many of you can actually accurately count the number of times you pee today? You might be able to do poop, but the number of times you pee today or yesterday, say, it's like immediately forgotten. It's just something you do and you get out and it's in our culture. It's in the way, I mean, I've been through potty training recently. It's sort of in the way we teach our children, that it's just something that, it's not an important activity, it's something that we try to forget, we don't talk about. So I think that is kind of, the blindness is cultural for many, many reasons, but that's one of them. And then, what was opening people's eyes? I mean, I think that it's still, I think that we're as a society, except for this group aside, I think it's still pretty blind. So, so I think different things though are going to open people's eyes. People's eyes are opened to other things that they care more about. I don't think that for most people in the world that sanitation is their number one topic. That's okay. It doesn't need to be, because toilets, as I said, connect to everything because we all use them, or should. I mean, in theory, we all have a need for them. And so they connect to everything. So what you have to do is you have to find the subject that's the passion of the person that you're talking to, and you can always find that link to the toilet. At least that's what in writing my book, in fact, that's what I found. I kind of was amazed with how much I could link this topic to, when I found myself writing about, the summit between Trump and Kim Jong-un in my book, I just thought, okay, this is really connected to everything. And you have to read the book to find out why that but but yeah, so there's a connection to almost anything. So thanks for the question, Sarah. Good question. Hi.
And I do recommend people do read the book if you haven't yet. And I think it also just points again to what you're saying. This issue is tied to all these other issues. So if you think urine diversion isn't going to grab the headline, start from one of those other places. Start from ocean pollution. Start from the phosphorus peak, that we fear. Like these are all places to get attention and interest. Julia, I'm thinking that maybe I'll ask one more question, and then if there's someone who's in person, we could go to them next. So if someone wants to get prepped for that. But in the meantime, Samantha McBride had asked, is it possible at this point to estimate the monetary benefits to building owners and or tenants from either of the options shown for large buildings? I think that was from the nature study. So above capital costs, she was thinking there will be labor impacts for building workers and tenants. Has some of that economic modeling happened? And I also want to want to shout out that others in the chat, specifically Odeminjwe Osarod, I hope I'm saying not saying your name too incorrectly, was just bringing up like, why are we even prioritizing finances at a time where the other things like environmental sustainability are so important? But with that said, what are the financial implications of some of this?
I'm not, this isn't really my area of expertise, but of course, these technologies kind of need to be financially viable. And my understanding is I didn't really have a chance to get into some of these urine concentrating, urine drying technologies. They are not yet at that stage, but with a lot of toilet technologies, it comes down to scale. So just with a lot of manufacturing, you need to have it happening at a certain scale before it becomes viable. There's also a question of automation, I understand, that will make them more viable, so you don't have the labor costs. So I think that this is probably a question that someone else could answer in more detail, but it's not at a stage that I understand it, that it's really going to start, if the question was making money back for the tenants or something like that, I don't know that we'll ever be there. There's long been this idea, well, not long, I mean, I think it kind of started with the Reinvent the Toilet Challenge, I'm not sure, but there's been this idea that sanitation can pay for itself if you just get the right technology. And in recent, I mean, there was some excitement around this idea because there are resources in our pee and our poop that we can collect, but I think that we have to understand that sanitation is actually always going to be a cost. It's expensive and it's important. It's a public service and we should expect to pay for it. The fact that we can recover resources is great, but I don't think it serves us well to have our eye on the prize of making money off of sanitation.
Gotcha. Yeah, that totally makes sense. I appreciate that perspective. Julie, is there someone at the summit live who'd like to join us for a question?
Yeah, we had a question whispered in from the audience about where, Chelsea, you plan on taking your work next in this realm or in other realms as a journalist and a writer.
And I think this will probably be our last question.
I'm really sorry. Can you ask that again? I was just reading Samantha's clarification. I see that I did not answer the question, but please, everyone, read the clarification because I think it's important to the point she's making.
Yeah. The question from our in-person audience here was just about where you plan on taking your work next after this.
Well, that's a nice question. I mean, here. Yeah, I'm keeping my eye. So I don't think I'm going to be able to write another book about toilets because I don't think the world needs another book for me about them. But I can continue to write articles. I'm a journalist at like by profession and by identity. So I think whatever I do will be something like that. We've been thinking about, different types of media as well, like maybe taking the story, to more to video realm or something like that. But for me, as a journalist, I kind of follow where the science is going. So I just try to keep my eye on things and yeah, see what's happening and then try to create a synthesis of it and write about it. Thanks for the question.
Thank you, Chelsea. And I'm so sorry to say, because there are so many other juicy questions in the chat and a lot coming in. But we are at that 1:15 time, and I know you've got to Eastern, and I know you've got to run. So Chelsea, maybe as a last thing, if folks have additional questions, if they want to find out more about your work, they want to read the book, either you want to share that slide one more time or put into the chat some good ways to.
Oh yeah, let me not try to share the slide again, lest we have that problem again. But
Okay.
You can find me at chelseawald.com.
And I can type actually if you want to. Oh, you got it.
This is my email address. I'm on Twitter. Well, I'm not on social media that much recent, but you can always try me on Twitter at Chelsea Wald. You can find me by sort of looking. I'm on Facebook at Chelsea Wald Writer. So if you want to follow me there or send me a note or something, I'd love to hear from you. I really appreciate the invitation to be here and your attention during this time. I hope that I have gotten you all off to a really good start. And I think that the summit's going to be great as always.
Thank you so much, Chelsea. Can we give one more round of applause, either unmuted via your little Zoom hands, however we'd like to do it.